Right, so now we're going to be filtering the news. On the previous section, I made a mistake. I put font style instead of font family. So now we are using Roboto. That's good. So okay, so we are not going to be we're not going to go back to styles. So okay, so now that we know props, we could take a different approach with header. So with props, we can share functions, values of objects or whatever. And we can share them with child components, just like we are doing with news list. We are just passing the whole list of news, and then the job of that news list is just rendering the news. Good. So now I'm gonna just start doing something, and then you're gonna see why. I'm gonna create a function. I'm gonna go to the index.js, and I'm gonna create a function that I'm gonna be sharing to a child component. In this case, the header. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna create a function that is gonna be called getKeyword, something like that. It's gonna be equal to a fat arrow function, then open and close, and we just pass a function. So this one, when it's gonna get triggered, it's gonna just console log a key, just a text. It's gonna say hey, something real simple. So now I'm gonna go to header and I'm gonna pass this function as props. Okay. So the name for this is going to be keywords. It's going to be equal to, and of course we say this because we mean the class, and then we pass get keyword. So now this function is going to be available inside header in theory. Okay, so I'm going to go right here and I'm going to do console log, and remember that whenever we pass something through props, this, if you're using a class, it's going to be available inside this that props that keywords in this case. Okay, so if we reload, we are getting the console log. Hey, it's telling us that we have a function that does this. So we are successfully sharing a function between parent component and child component. So what is the point of doing all of this? Now, in theory, if we have this function available, we can call it from within whatever, our code, and we can trigger this function. We can do that. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to delete the console log, and I'm going to go right here to the onChange. So every time we input a text, instead of triggering the input change handler, I want to trigger that props, that props keyword, that function that we have available. And in theory, it should be working. We should be getting console log hey. Okay, so I'm going to type something, and we are getting it. We get console log hey. So, okay, if we think about this, we are just triggering a function that we have on the parent component from within the child component. So what is the point of doing all of this? Why are we using a function and a class? We could just make this smaller and create a functional component. So, right here, we do the onChange. It runs this function, but we need to pass the events. We need to catch the events. So if I go right here and say event, and then do the console log, but instead of doing the console log hey, I call the event. I say event.target.value. In theory, again, we should be getting the value of what we are entering. So if I say Francis, we get it. So it's still working. So again, there's no need to do this. If I comment all of this out, just gonna comment all, and we try it again, it's still working. So there's no need to use a state. And this is what I've told you before, that if you can avoid using states, using class-based component, you should avoid this and use a functional component. So we're gonna change this back to a functional component. I'm gonna delete this because we are not gonna need it. I'm gonna delete this again because we are not gonna need it. I'm gonna say const, and I'm gonna just refactor this to a functional component. It's gonna be header, and then, of course, it's going to be equal to a function. And this function is going to receive some props, the props, that keywords. Now, since we are using a functional component, there's no need to use the render. We don't need it. Since we are not using component right here, there's no need to bring it. And right here, we are making a reference to this. And we don't have this. We are not using a class-based component. So we can say only props. Good. Let's see if it's working. At least we are not getting any errors. So if I type Francis, it works. Very good. So now, again, you should always take 5 minutes whenever you're building your own application. Take 5 minutes and think if you really need a functional component or a class-based component. Now, again, if you decide to use a class-based component because you like it more, that's fine. You can use it. It's still going to work. No one is going to say anything to you. It's still going to work. But, we're using less code and we're using less logic and not using the state twice. Now you're using state only once. So, less code. It's going to be a better performing application. Okay, so now we need to do more things. We need to, the idea of doing all of this this refactor is to get the keywords inside the state of the main app. We're going to get the keywords right here. We're going to store a new state. So let's do that right now. Okay, so let's filter the news. I'm going to tell you what's the logic with this. So we are getting the keywords right here whenever the user enters something on the input. So we are catching that keyword. If I say React, for example, we're going to catch React. So we're going to grab that keyword. We're going to filter the news JSON, all the news, and we're going to just get all the news with the title React. We're going to search the title, and if we find a match between the keyword and some keyword in the title, we're going to return the whole news. And we're going to store them in a new array. So in theory, if we type React, we'll loop all the news. It's going to find the second one. It's going to store it on an array. It's going to find the second one. It's going to pass as true, and it's going to store it in an array. And then it's going to be done with that loop. And at the end, we're going to have only one array with only 2 news. So, okay. So I'm going to delete, I'm going to just comment this. I'm going to use it later. So we have access to the keywords. Good. So now we need to create something, a function or whatever, that is going to loop all the news, and it's going to just grab the news with the keywords. Okay. So I'm going to say let, I'm going to create a variable that is going to be let, and I'm going to call this filtered, something like that. So this variable is going to filter the news, and we can use an ES6 helper that is going to be called filter. So we're going to say this.state.news, just like that. We're going to grab this state of news with all the news. And then we're going to use the helper filter. This is not React, this is ES6. So this filter is going to be running a function, and this on each iteration is going to pass an item. This is just like doing the map. It's going to run the loop, and on each iteration is going to pass each news. Just like we did with the news list item right here with the map. Let me find it right here. Same idea. So I'm going to go back to index. Now what we need to do on each iteration, we're going to be doing some checking right here. We're going to be checking if the title of each item, we have a match for the keyword. Okay. So this is, again, just raw JavaScript. I'm going to say return. We always need to use the keyword return whenever we use filter, just like we did with the map. So first, we're going to access the item, which is each new. Then we're going to say title dot. We're going to access the title. And now, again, we're going to be using raw JavaScript. We're going to check the index off. So the index off is going to be the event, the targeted value. So I'm going to go right here at the top. I'm going to create a new variable that is going to be called let keyword, something like that. And let keyword is going to be equal to event, the targeted value, which is the actual keyword. And then I'm going to pass keyword. So this is going to enter that news. For example, on the first iteration, is going to enter this. It's going to enter the title right here. It's going to check the whole string. It's going to check if the keyword that we are typing, if there is a match with any of the words we have right here. So if we type ES6, we're going to find a match right here. It's going to be returning true, and it's going to return the whole news. Okay. So we have the index off, the keyword, and we need to specify that this is true. So if this is true, it's going to return that news. Real simple. Okay. So I'm going to go and console log this variable, this filtered, just to check that we are getting this logic in the right way. Okay, so I'm going to go to the main application. I'm going to type E, and notice that we are already getting 3. And it means that it's not finding, we have one title that, we are not getting an E letter. That's good. So notice that there is right here, I'm using a caps. We don't have, it's, for example, when we match it right here, the index of, it's not going to match it between lowercase and uppercase. If it's uppercase, it's going to match. If it's lowercase, it's not going to match. Let me give you an example. If I say ES6 with capitals, we are getting one match, which is title new ES6, and this is the match, upgrade available. So we are filtering the news and we are bringing the only news where we get ES6 on the title. Now, if I do ES6, of course, not happening. It's not finding that one. Of course, we will need to do more logic right here. You know, we're going to do that later, maybe. So, okay. So we are getting the filtered news. That is the main point of all of this. So now, since we have the filtered news, we need a way to tell the news list to render the filtered news instead of all the news. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go right here at the top. I'm going to put a comma, and I'm going to create a new state. It's going to be filtered. And filtered at the beginning, when the application starts, is going to be empty. Of course, because we don't have a filter. Good. So it's going to start as empty. And then, as soon as we get the filtered, we get a new state of filter, we're going to set the state of this filtered with whatever result we have right here. Okay, so I'm going to go right here. I'm going to say this, that's set state, open and close. And we're going to say that this filtered is going to be equal to whatever we get right here after we type the keyword. Okay, since we are using ES6, there's no need to do this. We can use pass filter, and this is going to pass as this. It's going to all happen behind the scenes. Right, so now we have the new state of filters. Good. So now we need to specify right here what we want to output, what we want to render. So it's going to look a little bit weird. We could do it just right here, and I'm going to use a ternary operation. I'm going to say this, that state dot, and we're going to be accessing the filtered. We're going to check if on the filtered, whenever the application renders for the first time, if we have something inside, if it's empty. So I'm going to check the length of it. So if the length is going to be equal to 0, which it means that it's going to be empty, we want to do something right here. And if it's not empty, which means that we type the keyword and we have some results, we're going to display something else. So if the filtered is empty, we're going to say render this, that state, that news. We're going to render all the news. But if the filtered state has some data, we want to render that one instead. So we're going to say this, that state, that filtered. All right, made a mistake. Let me go back. Good. So you know the fonts are really big, so you can see right here the code. If I trim it down, you're not going to be able to see it on the screen. The fonts are going to be real small. That's why I have this. So we're going to trim this in a minute. So what is happening right here? The application renders for the first time. It's going to be checking if we have something inside the filtered. Of course, we don't have anything because whenever the application starts, the state of filtered is going to be nothing. Good, just an empty array. Good. So since this is going to be passing as true, we're going to just return that state, that news. This state contains all the news. Now the second one, if this length, the filtered length, has some news, which means that we've made a filtered and we get results, it's going to render the filtered. Okay, let's see if it's working. I'm going to go right here. I'm going to say ES6. And it's working. Let's try something else. If I delete everything and leave it to empty, it's going to fall back and go to this state. So now the, made a mistake. So now news list is going to be rendering all the news. So it's working. If let's say React, for example, of course not going to work because it's lowercase and we have uppercase right here. If I do uppercase React, we get 2. So it's working. Right. Then this line, it's a little bit long. It's not human readable. So what we can do, we can create an alias for this. And you can find this is kind of common. You're going to find it in a lot of React projects. So we're going to have let, we're going to create a variable that is going to serve as an alias for that state, that filter. And you know, it makes sense. This application, this code could get much longer. So we are always using that state and something. So you can create an alias just for this. I'm going to say news filtered, and this one is going to be equal to that state, that filtered. And then I'm going to say let, and I'm going to say news, and then whole, something like that. It's going to be, instead of that state, that filtered, it's going to be news. Okay, there we go. So instead of making a reference to this, because it's a long string, I could just say news filtered, replace this with news filtered, and right here, I'm going to copy the news whole and make a reference to news whole. So, you know, a little bit better. So I'm going to go right here and test it. I'm going to say ES6 and it works. And if I delete everything, it works. Okay, so everything works as expected. Now, let's recap something right here. I'm using, whenever the application starts, I'm storing the JSON data inside news. I'm storing all the news inside news. Good. And then we are running something to filter, and we are storing the filtered news inside something else. Why am I duplicating this? It's always a bad idea to mutate the original state of something that it's really important. In this case, we are rendering all the news. We get all the news right here. If I filter the news and I store it inside news, I'm going to be mutating the original data. And on the next time that we need to use this function, we're not going to get this data. You know, we are just mutated the data. We don't have access to this. So we would have to fetch all the news again and do something else. Okay, that's good. So, you know, we could take a different approach in this. We could use life cycles, but we are not there yet. We're going to get there. So, okay, this is the final section of this tiny project. It looks really ugly, but that's good. It's for practicing, you know. The main point of this, it's not making a nice application, an application with good looks. It's not the main point of this. The main point is just learn the basics of React. We're gonna be doing more sections with React. We're gonna be learning a lot of more things, and we're gonna be talking about life cycles. We need to talk about router. That's gonna be really interesting. So we still need to do a lot of things. So let's go to the next section and start with something new.